Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my first look at the Sony A6600. Now, for those of you that missed my preview when this camera was announced, I'll catch you up right now. It's going to retail for roughly $1,400 US. You can pre-order it presently. It will launch on November 29th. Today is November 4th. Just received it, of course, for review purposes. I haven't purchased this camera. After all, it hasn't been released yet. And essentially what this flagship promises is everything that made the A6400 so popular, but with in-body image stabilization, a more robust grip, which is a product of having a more robust battery, the Type-Z battery that many of you are already familiar with. This effectively doubles battery life, which I think is a very big deal. We've lost the flash from all previous models, kind of like the A6500 right here, which many would argue the 6600 replaces, and I understand why, because we are working with the same 24 megapixel sensor. Don't worry, I'm going to keep that clean. And we now have a screen like the A6600 that comes all the way around for vlogging. And many people have dubbed this nearly a perfect vlogging camera, and it's obvious why. It builds on everything the A6600 has, basically best-in-class autofocus, 11 frames per second, not a new thing, but more accurate here. 8 if you're shooting in silent mode. We have 4K video. We have the flip around screen. We have touch screen capability for focusing, as well as shutter release. We also have the added addition of not just being able to monitor our audio, but also a microphone jack. This is a big deal. We've never had this on any other APS-C camera, especially not a flagship one. And while this does sit at the top of the flagship pyramid right now for the APS-C cameras that Sony cranks out, and I have reviewed pretty much all of them, I do feel that we still have something else that is probably coming, because we haven't seen an A7000, and well, this all got real back in 2012 with the the NEX7. I almost said Sony, very effective with your rebrand. So there's a lot to like with this camera, in my opinion, but I'm going to hit on now, since I pretty much went through all of the important updates to it, why people were disappointed with it. First and foremost, they didn't get a new sensor. Everyone figured we're getting one. I mean, why would it take so long? By the way, this is the plastic bag from Lens Rentals, if you were trying to figure out, that houses the battery and charger. So with the A6500, as I mentioned, you have the same exact sensor, but you don't have the same exact autofocus system. I believe, in my opinion, autofocus really picked up, improved with the 6500, then with the 6400. As nonsensical as that seems, autofocus took the leap. You know, we got A9 capability in an APS-C body with the A6400, which I, of course, reviewed at launch. And what it was missing, we now have a polished, complete product. We don't have to worry about a lack of in-body image stabilization. We got the bonus of better battery life, as I mentioned. But it doesn't do much more than that to differentiate. Yes, there are some shooting modes, being able to select 2 autofocus points with this camera that didn't and don't exist in any other APS-C camera. And I don't know what they'll do with firmware down the road. They got rid of the panorama mode. You know, there are certain things they did away with. I mean, you can see panorama mode right here on the A6500 dial, and it doesn't exist on the 6600. So I understand why people feel like this isn't flagship, because it really is just, in many ways, an improved version of the 6400. But I'm not sure what people are actually looking for. It is an evolutionary camera, not a revolutionary one, but that's not a bad thing. I feel like it's necessary, and if we want to see continued improvements in what Sony is rolling out, this is how we're going to get it. Now, would I have loved to see 4K at 60 frames? Of course. Who doesn't want 4K at 60p? Would I have liked a new 32 or 36 megapixel sensor? Sure. But this thing really does provide, I think, some key improvements. I mean, the body, more robust, as I mentioned. We're going, a little over 500 grams with this, as opposed to, of course, being, about 450 or 470 for the 6500. So it's not that much bigger, but I would argue just enough, because of this grip, to make it more ergonomic. Would I have liked to have seen an improvement in the EVF? Of course. I know that the EVF is the same as what we're working with on the A6500, so that's not what I would have liked to have seen, but that's not going to prevent me from recommending a camera like this if it delivers what what I think it's going to, which is, again, effectively a more complete A6400. Now, when you look at the price of the A6400, I think that's when people are going to say, well, $1,400, the A6400 is a bargain compared to this camera if it's working with the same sensor, same 425 points of both phase and contrast detection. It, of course, has eye autofocus, all of that good stuff, and the real-time tracking for 4K video, which Sony is incorporating into just about every new camera they have, because after all, it is a little bit of a gold mine. But for everything that people are saying it's lacking, again, I think that this is really unmatched. Yes, Fuji has what many would argue is a better camera, but if you're already heavily vested in E-mount, or you just love what Sony's been doing, you've got a very good alternative to going full frame. And if you are a full frame shooter like myself, and you want an APS-C B camera, this is really the king of the hill, because you have the same color science now as many of its full frame siblings. You have the same battery type as its full frame siblings. I mean, there are advantages here. Of course, E-mount lenses, both full frame and APS-C, work across both sensor types. So this camera's got a lot going for it in spite of the mixed reception. So while a lot of people were disappointed, they wanted more, and I get it. As I said earlier in the video, we're used to being wowed by Sony, and so that's why many people said, wait a minute, this is an incremental update. This isn't Canon, this isn't Nikon, and I get it. Trust me, it's part of the reason I love Sony. But I also am going to afford them a break when they don't blow our minds. A7R3 right here, you can see the size difference. And a lot of people will say, why pick up the A6600 when for just a little bit more money you can pick up the A7 III? Well, I would argue because almost everything about the A6600 outside of it not being full frame is superior to the A7 III. That's a very good reason to pick this up, and it's less expensive still. That may change as the A7 III continues to go down in price. It's not a new camera. The A7R III, of course, still much more expensive, but a comparable camera to it would be the A7R II. And then I'll give you also for size comparison, the A7R IV, which is really the king of the hill in Sony's realm right now. And I'll have the A9 Mark II eventually as well on loan to review for all of you. And you can start to see the size difference. I mean, if I throw the wide angle that I have on the A6500 right here onto the 66, which may be a favorite pairing for me. I'm going to do that right now, and it makes sense that this is the first lens I put on it. I mean, after mine got destroyed, I bought another for a very good reason. This is one of the best compact wide-angle lenses ever made, in my opinion. You start to see the difference, right? I mean, 12 to 24 full frame, 10 to 18 APS-C. Look at that footprint. I mean, it's real. So there's absolutely a place for this camera, and while Fuji has a new sensor, better ergonomics, and arguably many will say it's a better camera overall, I think the A6600 does an admirable job of delivering just about every single feature except for, you know, as I mentioned, a new sensor and 4K at 60p in a body that still is not, I mean, it's not inexpensive at $1,400 US, but it's not bonkers. And on top of that, you have pretty much everything that you would want outside of a few things. And I do think that that is a good thing. Not a perfect camera, really no camera is, but I'm very interested to see how this performs with my G Master 100 to 400 because of the APS-C crop factor. It may make for a nearly perfect, action cam that is relatively tiny. And while I love throwing the 100 to 400 on here and getting the crop sensor going on too in order to gain extra reach, this is more practical. That's the truth of the matter, because not everybody's going to go out and buy a $3,500 camera, or they may eventually buy one, but the investment is probably better made in glass. And that's really the point I'm coming to with this body. You minimize your damages here, pick up some nice lenses, and you wait for the next best thing. Or as I said, this is a great B camera possibly. Now, I haven't shot with it, but I already know what to expect. They didn't rethink the wheel here with this camera, and in some ways that's good, in some ways that's bad. I'm on board with everybody that wanted more, but at the same time, I'm also very content, and who knows, this may end up becoming my favorite camera. And as I mentioned, it is not a perfect vlogging camera. We still have some pretty bad rolling shutter issues since it's the same sensor, and we'll have to wait for a new sensor for that. But the autofocus capability, the battery life improvement, the flip around display, I'm not crying over the lack of flash, although I would like to still have it on board, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. This amounts to a formidable camera. And the fact that people are even saying, well, is it the best? And there's only one other camera to compare it to, really, the Fuji. I think that's pretty complimentary of what we're getting here. And that's not to say Canon and Nikon don't have anything going on. Panasonic doesn't have anything going on. But Sony has really built quite, I would say, a great stable of cameras. And I think a lot of us thought they were leaving this behind. And the fact of the matter is, they didn't. And that's a really good thing. So again, just first impressions, first thoughts, feels good, solid. Don't love that whoever used this before me beat it up. It seems like it. But hey, you know, it's seen some days. Hopefully good, and it was used well. In terms of the actual buttons, they didn't, you know, I would still love to see this video button relocated. We're not there yet. I don't know what else to tell anybody. We have new aspect ratios, but overall, until I go out there and I start using this, I'm not going to tell you that it's bad. So there's nothing new to learn outside of the fact that the guy or lady that shot with this previously did not want to use 4K. I'm not sure why, but maybe it's because they didn't have SD cards. No, I'm kidding. That could handle it. I do think that this is really one of the best cameras out there if you're interested in a mirrorless APS-C option that's lightweight, great autofocus, again, best in class. And yes, you could just opt for the A6400, but I have to tell you, the battery life alone is a reason for me to not consider the A6400. Forget about the in-body image stabilization, which is not something forgettable. And yeah, a lot of you could say, Ed, I can just connect a battery pack to my A6400. I can just buy 10 batteries. You can do all of those things. In fact, I'm the one who generally will recommend that. But for me personally, I have been waiting for an improvement in battery life in the I almost said A line, the APS-C line, for a really long time. I said this at the top of the video. I'll reiterate again. And we finally have it. You know, if there had been a new sensor, if there had been a bump up in the 4K quality, that would have been great. But there's always the next model, right? We live in the now. This is a really good camera. It appears on paper. And if it does react and respond the way that I expect, I don't think too many people are going to be upset with its performance. In fact, I think they're going to enjoy it. So I'm looking forward to covering it. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.